Hey y'all, it's Merrick from Inner Orbit, and today we are going to make this channel setting. It features 3 round faceted 3mm spessertine garnets in sterling silver. We're going to need some half round 20 gauge half hard, some square wire 20 gauge dead soft, and some 32 gauge round dead soft for the weaving. This is our garnets that we're going to use right here. So first of all, we're going to cut our lengths of 20 gauge square and half round, and we are going to cut about a foot in length. You don't need this much wire for what we're doing, but I'm going to continue with this channel setting and build it into a pendant, so I want to have ample wire to work with. As you can see, I wrap our 32 gauge around 2 of the 20 gauge square. The 32 gauge that I cut was pretty long in length. I'd say it was 2 arms lengths. It's always good to have extra weaving wire, and you can always cut it and use the rest in a different project. Basically, I am doing 2 wraps with the 32 gauge around 2 of the square wires, and then I'm coming up from those and around 2 of our half round wires in the middle, and then I'm coming back down and locking that in and doing 2 wraps around the opposite 2 square wires. It might sound complicated at first, but it's going to make a lot of sense. Basically, we have 4 square wires, 2 on each side, and our 2 half round in the middle. Eventually, this half round wire in the middle, we're going to sort of separate it from the rest, and those are going to act as sort of a seat belt or something that hugs the edge of the tops of the faceted gems to hold them in place. At this point, I am about ready to bend our half wires up and separate them from the rest. As you can see, I've bent them upwards, and at this stage I'm going to want to separate these 2 half round wires because I am going to create a small weave between them, and this small weave is going to lead up to our first faceted gem that we're setting. So I'm doing a little bit more wrapping around our square base wires just so that our 32 gauge is coming up right where we need it to into this intersection of the half round wires that we've split. Okay, so now I'm starting this weave between the half rounds, 2 on each side, and also making sure that everything we've wrapped thus far is still tightly wrapped and in place. And gradually we are creating this weave that is going to work up towards our gem. I keep adjusting these half round wires just to make sure that they're going the direction that we want. And about 3 or 4 of our wraps on each side of the weave, and we're about ready to return back down to the square wires with our 32 gauge. So once the weave is complete, we're going to bring our 32 gauge wire down through the middle between our 2 sets of square wires, and we're going to lock that back in by wrapping around the bottom set of square wires. And I'm going around probably 5 or 6 times. This is to make up for space that the weave has created, and we want everything to line back up. So I'm going to do 5 or 6 times around one side and then go across the tops of the square wires and below the half round. So basically straight across. Right there, you can see I go straight across, and then 5 or 6 times around the top square wires as well. And once I do that, I'm going to need to adjust my square wires just to make sure they're still in line, and we want to keep things as parallel as possible. We'll speed up this process, but I'm basically just weaving between the square wires. Now you can see I am adjusting the half round. I'm bending across where I want it to actually rest because I'm trying to create this joint and this bend right at the top of that weave, and that angle, I do it again on the other side and then bend it back. That creates this nice bend right where we want it to be. And basically that's going to allow us to have these half round wires extend straight, basically parallel with one another above the square wires. So this is a side view, and we want those raised up a little bit because these half round wires are going to hug the top edges of the faceted gem and hold them in place. At this point, I grab my needle nose pliers, and this is something I realized helps a lot in this process. I use the needle nose pliers to push down and make a seat for the gem. Here it is, our first garnet, and I'm going to pop that in place. Oop, it usually isn't as easy as I just made it look. And you can see where it's going to sit, and I'm just going to make sure that the amount of weave beneath it is going to line up with the end of that. This is a side view to see that we're pretty close. I'm going to do a couple more weaves between the square wires just to make sure that our 32 gauge is coming up where I want it to set the half round, because as we weave between the square wires, eventually I'm going to come up and lock in these half rounds to the square with just 2 wraps around each. There's the first one. Here's a closer view. And I do 2 wraps around there. Use my fingernails to tighten that wrap. And then from here, ooh, I guess I missed it that time. So 2 around there. And then from here, I'm going to take our 32 gauge and we're going to go down between square wires on the bottom, and we're going to lock that in place with the 2 square wires directly beneath it. At this point, we will take our 32 gauge and go straight across, and we're going to do 2 wraps around that top set of square wires, and then we're going to come up and lock in that top half round just like we did on the other side. Just making sure everything's properly in place and that the edges of the half round are still hugging the tops of our garnet. Using dead soft wire makes it a lot easier to tighten all these little spots. As you can see, there's just a lot of delicacy that goes into this, and having dead soft wire makes it a lot easier to tighten these individual little wraps. So just word to the wise, for weaving wire, I prefer dead soft, and it might make it easier for you too. Alright, we're gonna speed through this next part because I'm just weaving between the square wires. I've created another seat for our second garnet, and I'm going to get my needle nose pliers back out, and we're going to gently push down right where we want this garnet to sit, and that's just going to soften and allow for the garnet to sit nicely in place. It's also going to allow it to sit snugly next to the first garnet. Here's our side view. You can see there's a nice slot and an area for our second garnet to sit. This one is giving me a little bit of a trickier time than the first, and this might happen to you as well. Feel free to dump it out and sort of start over, reorient, reset, maybe bend the half round wires up a little bit like I just did to give it a little bit more room. And we're going to nudge it into place. And ideally we're going to be able to push these half round wires back down and it'll sit flat. This is the big reason why I'm using half hard, half round. I find that it holds its structure a lot better. In this case, it's not going to do a lot of bending as I'm setting it over the tops of our gemstones. So there's a time for dead soft half round, and in my opinion, this is the time for half hard, half round wire. And we're going to do the very same thing to lock down our half round wires down to our square. Make sure everything's all lined up, and we're going to come up and around this first half round wire on the bottom here and do 2 wraps around there. We're going to pull it snug and then bring this 32 gauge down through the middle of the 2 square wires and give it 2 wraps around that to lock it in place. Once we do, we bring it over above the square and below the half round straight across, and then 2 wraps around our square wires and up around the half round to lock it down. And with every wrap, we're just making sure everything's tight and properly in place. All right, everything's looking good. And we're gonna do a little bit more weaving just to make another seat for our 3rd gem. So I'm gonna speed this up a little bit here. And look at that. We have another seat we've woven across. You can see I could do a little bit better job keeping these parallel, the square wires underneath. It's close, but it could be cleaner. And at this point I need to do a little bit more weaving just to make the seat slightly bigger. And it looks like at this point we are ready for our 3rd and final gemstone. I'm going to bend up our half round. Just give basically that gemstone a place to slide in cleanly. Take our handy needle nose pliers and bend down ever so gently this seat, and we will have a spot for our 3rd and final garnet. All right, there it is, and that's looking pretty clean. I'm really going for as tight of a connection between the gems. I don't want to see any space between them if possible. And so far so good on this piece. And for this last and final garnet, we're going to do the same thing that we did before to lock down the half round with the square wire. However, once they're locked down, I'm going to be bending these half round back towards each other to basically do a reverse weave and mirror the one that started this process at the beginning between the half round. A weave that leads up to the gems and then a weave that leads away from them and basically brings our half round wires back together in between our square wires. And from there we'll be able to build any number of things. I find it really useful to start a piece actually with a channel setting and just cut plenty of wire to work with, and it's easy to work out from this point and take it any number of directions that inspires you. So now I'm just inspecting to make sure that all the gems are sitting flush, which they are. And now I'm taking the half round wires and I'm bending them across past where I want them to go, but I'm creating another bend intentionally right at that edge of the gem there. I'll do the same thing with the other half round. And I'm creating this little triangle between the two, and that is where we will be weaving away from the gems, doing a reverse weave, which is definitely harder than weaving small to large. We're starting wide and we're working inwards. You just have to be especially diligent to make sure that you're tightening the weave at every intersection here as we go, and it's a little bit of a tedious process, but I really like the look of the symmetry, having a weave start and end a channel setting like this, and it's a good thing to practice as well. So here you see a little bit of a close-up. Sometimes the wire gets snagged a little bit. You can bend that half round away, and I'm probably going to do maybe 3 wraps on either side, 2 per side of the weave, if that makes sense. So 2 on one side, 2 on the other, and I'll do that 3 times on each side. And once we've gotten to a good point, I am gonna basically take these half round wires and try to bend them back to parallel with these square wires on either side. So I'll start with one and then the other. And first I'm bending them away to encourage this joint right here to bend properly and back into place. It takes a little bit of finagling, and I'm not doing the best job here, but eventually I managed to bend these wires back into place. Sometimes it's easier than others, but it's not going to interfere with the final look. I'll be able to clean this up fine. And that is basically it. I'm just going to continue a little bit further and show you how I lock these half round wires back down in the middle. So basically we're going from these 2 square wires on either side and locking in the 2 half round in the middle together as one. I'm continuing to weave between the square wires until I get to a point where I can come up between the squares and wrap around both half round together and lock them in, and basically treat them as a single wire in the middle of the weave, just like we did to start. I've sped it up a little bit here, but you can see I eventually lock these 2 half rounds back together in the middle of the weave between the square wires, and this is our final product. There's a side view, and that's what the back looks like. Basically just a weave, and it could be more parallel, but it could be worse. And there you have it. I hope that was helpful. Thanks for watching.